Workers' rights advocates have cheered Illinois' new law mandating paid time off. Small business owners say they have to cut costs in other ways.
It potentially could cost us more. The bottom line, there's no question.
That story on the way on WGLT's Sound Ideas. Good evening, I'm John Norton. Also on today's show, the Bloomington-Normal chapter of the Audobon Society drops its association with the group's namesake over the man's complicated history.
We want people to feel included. We want people to feel belonging, welcome.
And state of Illinois doing better financially than expected this budget year, but forecasters still offer a dim view of the state's budget prospects in the coming years. Those stories follow a Bloomington-Normal news update just ahead. This is Sound Ideas on 89.1 WGLT and WGLT.org, part of the NPR network.
Support for WGLT comes from Bloomington-Normal Audiology. Hear My Story continues with local patient Paul Brandt.
So I just went without them for all those years. I talked to somebody who had recently gotten hearing aids and talked about the fact that they were connected to the TV. And so that kind of prompted me to try it again.
Paul's full story can be found at bnaudiology.com.
From the campus of Illinois State University in Normal, this is WGLT's news magazine, Sound Ideas. Good evening, I'm John Norton. All Illinois workers can begin to earn paid time off this week, thanks to a new bill signed into law last year. The Paid Leave for All Workers Act allows employees to bank 1 hour of personal time for every 40 hours worked, up to 40 hours a year, regardless of full-time or part-time status. WGLT's Lauren Warnicki reports on how small business owners in Bloomington-Normal are adopting to the change.
Co-owner Sarah McManus of the Garlic Press in Uptown Normal sees the value of paid time off for workers.
If there's people that are really living paycheck to paycheck, that's a very big deal.
McManus says her boutique kitchen and specialty gift shop has a strong reputation for being flexible when workers need time off.
If their car breaks down or the trains kept them late, we understand. But the difference is that they could get paid for that.
Still, the new law presents a challenge for the Garlic Press, especially when combined with a $1 increase to the minimum wage. Both took effect Monday.
Yes, it potentially could cost us more. The bottom line, there's no question.
McManus says she's offset increased labor cost through marginal price increases, passing some of the burden to customers. Another strategy has been careful attention to profit margins when selecting merchandise. Some businesses, like convenience and grocery stores, have cut labor costs by installing more self-checkout machines. For McManus, it means her and Garlic Press co-owner Pam Loxon putting in extra hours.
We're the ones that are staying till 7. We send everyone home and we work the floor. That's a direct way for us to save money on that bottom line.
It's just one more thing for employers to factor in, putting pressure on already beleaguered business owners after struggling through the pandemic. That's assuming they're aware of the law in the first place.
I will say that probably there are a ton of small businesses especially that have no idea this is happening.
That's Katie McBride Rife, an employee benefits consultant at the Iowa-based firm Cottingham & Butler. McBride Rife lives in Hudson, and she serves on the Bloomington-Normal Human Resources Council.
We knew it was coming, but I mean, if you're not plugged in, if you're busy, get a two-man shop, you don't know this kind of stuff.
For larger employers with primarily full-time workers, the new law may simply mean a change to the employee handbook.
My advice to my clients has been look, if you're already offering 40 hours a year, all you have to do is say you can take it for any reason. Adding that language in there is really all you've got to do, and you've got to offer it to all your part-timers too.
But even large employers aren't totally clear on the particulars. McBride Rife says she's getting a lot of questions about compliance to the new law and doesn't have a lot of answers.
If you're an employer that has employees all over the country, does this law apply to them, or is it just Illinois-based employees? Depends.
McBride Rife says tracking is an additional challenge. Payroll companies are developing ways for Illinois employers to keep track of the accrual process, but companies who manage payroll internally will need to develop a system to track time earned and time off. The law also stipulates workers can use paid time off for any reason and are not required to find someone to fill their shift.
So if you're that retail shop that maybe has one or two people working, what if both of them call in the same day? And then how do you staff your store?
The law could further strain the restaurant industry, which is still recovering from the pandemic and works on razor-thin staffing and profit margins. General Manager Joe Slane of Bloomington-Normal keeps an on-call list for emergencies. Prior to the Paid Leave for All Workers Act taking effect, employees were expected to cover a missed shift.
We can't not have shifts covered during a day. We try to keep it to a minimum so people can make a decent amount of money, so every person is important on that day.
Like other part-time workers, servers and bartenders can now accrue up to 40 hours of paid time off a year at the minimum wage for tipped employees. As of Monday, in Illinois, that went up $1 to $8.40 an hour. The federal wage for tipped workers is $2.30 an hour. Customers may have noticed small price increases already at Medici to cover increased food and labor costs. Selene says they're taking a wait-and-see approach as to how the law will affect staffing and costs.
It's a big question mark on how that'll all pan out.
This is Sound Ideas. I'm Lauren Warnicki. It remains to be seen how Bloomington-Normal's 1,200 university professors might use the new benefit from the Paid Leave for All Act. Illinois State and Illinois Wesleyan University each added 40 hours of additional paid time off to workers' coffers, on top of sick and vacation time they already receive. ISU Director of Benefit Services Kelly Walker says each academic department will decide how faculty may use the time while avoiding a disruption in courses.
It's going to be new and probably a little clunky at first, but I think we'll figure it out.
Perhaps the biggest change for teachers is that the onus now falls on their department to fill a class, though professors may still choose to find their own subs. These sorts of provisions will likely have a greater impact for university faculty, whose pay is not affected by occasionally needing to miss a class.
It probably means less to this exempt staff in terms of maintaining pay, and it's more of this is an absence that can't reflect negatively on you.
Student workers are exempt from the Paid Leave for All Workers Act, as are workers protected by collective bargaining agreements. In a statement, Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton says the new law serves as, quote, protecting wages and providing relief for residents and their families, while taking another major step to make our state the best place to live and work. Katie McBride-Rife of Bloomington-Normal Human Resources Council is not convinced the law will attract workers to the state. The state's labor laws also make it a tough place to do business.
I'm of the mindset that you don't force employers to offer benefits if they historically haven't. I don't think that that's something that the government should necessarily be involved in.
McBride-Rife says small businesses who want to take care of their workers were likely already doing it. And without a dedicated human resources person on staff, that means expensive outsourcing to a third-party agency or private attorney.
I haven't met one business owner or HR person that's like, oh my gosh, thank gosh, I have another law that is going to take care of my people. No, it's another layer of complexity. The larger companies, they're managing it a little bit better. But yeah, for these smaller ones, it's really tough.
I'm Lauren Warnicki.
The law makes Illinois the third state in the nation to require paid time off. Coming up tomorrow on Sound Ideas, you'll hear from a Bloomington attorney who has been tasked with making the legal field in Illinois more civil, ethical, and inclusive. And speaking of courtroom civility, we'll also preview the Community Players' latest production, 12 Angry Jurors. Again, that's tomorrow on WGLT's Sound Ideas.
The labor market is pretty close to what it was like in the before times, but normal today looks a lot different than it did 4 years ago. We'll tell you more next time on Marketplace.
Listen to Marketplace beginning at 5:30 this afternoon on WGLT, sponsored by CEFCU.
Since the pandemic, healthcare workers have been quitting in droves. With fewer options, some patients just go to the emergency room.
We're seeing a lot of people coming in for things that are really primary care issues, not urgent care issues. They can't get in part because there's just such a lack of providers.
How a doctor shortage hurts patients and practitioners. Tomorrow on Morning Edition from NPR News.
Wake up with Morning Edition tomorrow morning on 89.1 WGLT.
This is Sound Ideas, WGLT's news magazine. The Venerable John Wesley Powell chapter of the Audobon Society is no longer called that. Starting with the new year, it has become the Grand Prairie Bird Alliance. The name change is increasingly common among birding organizations across the nation. In this interview with WGLT's Charlie Schlenker, Alliance board member Christina Schultz talks about the reasons for the shift. Schultz says they thought about the name change for more than a year.
We started to think about what are the responsibilities for inclusion at the organizational level. And how does that play out? And certainly at the individual person-to-person level, and we see this too in workplace culture as well, and in school culture. We want people to feel included. We want people to feel belonging, welcome. Well, that also triggers to even how and what you call yourself and what you think your reason for being is. So that is really, it kind of caused us to do some reflection, some comparison.
How much of a barrier was the John James Audubon name to inclusion? Yes, he was a slave trader. Yes, he was a racist. Yes, he killed birds that he then arranged and painted. So that's not a terribly great message for today's audiences. But he did popularize the love of birds.
It's interesting because I think thanks to the information age, you can do some deep research on origins. Where did things come from? How did they come about? How did they become mainstream? I think for us, in a more pragmatic, and maybe this is sort of a Midwestern perspective, we were already struggling with Audubon with a D, with Autobahn, T, and the Speedway in Germany. So I think the way in which natural history, conservation history, biology, a lot of facts that I'm a 47-year-old woman walking around with a college degree and a master's. I probably couldn't tell you that much about Audubon or his origins. And so we were already struggling with, and this is what's happening at the national level, relevance.
So he no longer resonates in the popular culture.
The name resonates in the popular culture because of birds and like the calendar you might get or the mail you might get to offer, please donate to us. But I don't know that anybody has a walking knowledge of his attributes and his impact. I think the name is a brand, and I think the brand is birds. So it's still effective in that way. But I don't feel like we need to remain attached to any particular person when we have a mission that's here and now and that should be more inclusive.
So how does Grand Prairie Bird Alliance fill today's needs?
Grand Prairie Bird Alliance fills today's needs because we're able now to just take the jargony way of calling ourselves or the spelling complications. We've diminished that somewhat. We're still polysyllabic. That's going to stay with us. But we're able to focus on love of nature, love of birds, love of place. Really by situating in the Grand Prairie, we get to tell more stories about what Bloomington-Normal is sitting on and sitting within and what's connecting us to other areas here, not just in Central Illinois, but regionally in the Midwestern part of the U.S. We can focus more on that emphasis on alliance. Who needs to know why birds matter, what habitat actually is connected with healthy bird populations and migration. It's not so much for experts. It could be for anybody. And so I think there's a kind of a friendliness just to have the word bird, very simple word, and alliance, also a pretty simple concept to get around. I feel like necessarily means we bring the love of nature, the love of birds to a very mainstream audience.
This is Sound Ideas. I'm Charlie Schlenker. We're talking with Christina Schultz, a board member and steering committee member of the Grand Prairie Bird Alliance, a renamed organization. About the renaming, how many names did you consider for the renaming, and what were some of the ones that didn't quite make it?
We were an outlier in the chapters of the Audobon Society for being named after a person when most others are named after a place or a town or it's about where is birding happening. And so we knew for sure we wanted to break with a person's name. Then came how different or similar do we want to be with what's happening nationally and locally. And so members of our board did some really helpful benchmarking with other organizations. In Wisconsin, they've got Badgerland as a thing. So they were able to bring Badgerland into their updated bird association. We didn't really feel like we had something quite that accessible, but we did really like the idea of place. And so that really brought us to brainstorming some different options. One that we discarded, Central Illinois Bird Alliance. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but Central Illinois is a pretty well used phrase.
Doesn't make you stand out.
Doesn't make you stand out.
If you think of all the plants involved in the Grand Prairie, the native grasses and the different kinds of soils and water retention aspects. Is it going to help you in habitat restoration projects?
I believe so. I think some of the kind of habitat you're talking about also complements the built environment pretty well. So while we can take swaths of spaces and say, hey, could we make this more biodiverse? Can we get rid of the non-native, the more invasive plantings that might be inhibiting the biodiversity, including birds? I think that allows us to have some pretty effective and productive conversations with folks at the town of Normal and also city of Bloomington within Parks and Recreation. We have a great alliance with Master Gardeners, where we can think through what could we bring in that would be nurturing and maybe restorative to our local landscape.
The pandemic was a boon to birders.
Yes.
You could do it outdoors. It was get you out and stirring about, and it's safe. Are some of the people that came to birding during the pandemic going to go back to previous habits, and how are you going to try to retain them?
That is how my family came into birding. The copious amount of time at home and in nature that the pandemic offered really did put birding higher up on the things to do list than it had ever been before. And since we've all resumed kind of regular lifestyles and work-life balance, I would think a little bit of less time birding. However, once you become attuned to nature, you notice it wherever you are. And so the great thing about birding is you could be walking down the sidewalk, and if there's a bird in the tree next to you, you could stop and say, oh, that's a sparrow. Oh, that's a bluebird. And so I think the nice thing about birding is how portable and scalable it is. So for us to continuously engage with our members and or just the general curious public, there's lots of things we can do. One is to continue offering bird walks, where if you have a little free time on a Saturday or Sunday, come out and help get guided through the process of landing that bird in your binoculars. We can also offer films like during the winter sometimes or the late fall to help make sure that people still feel like they're getting that nature fix. And I think our board has been talking about whether there are some improved ways of reaching out through digital means. A lot of zoos have the little cam that's kind of keeping an eye on, when baby animals are born, or how did that newcomer handle the adaptation to their new location. So there might be some things that we can do with a more digital experience. We probably have a lot of room to continue going down there.
That's Christina Schultz, a board member of the renamed Grand Prairie Bird Alliance. She spoke with WGLT's Charlie Schlenker. Stories and conversations around Bloomington-Normal and McLean County. This is WGLT's Sound Ideas. State of Illinois has some good news in its latest budget estimate, but that's in the short term. Long term looks more problematic. With new estimates from the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, Capital News Illinois' Jennifer Fuller talks with Editor-in-Chief Jerry Nowicki about this year's budget surplus and why that might not last long.
And I think what the real headline was from that is that GOMB is upping its revenue estimate for the current year by $1.4 billion, which is quite a increase, certainly at this point in the fiscal year. We're now 5 months in, but a lot of that's due to the state now collecting some federal matching funds that it didn't correctly apply for in previous years. So they've rectified that, and now it's sort of just moving to this fiscal year. It's a couple $100 million, and then just some other types of trends and some good performance and tax revenues and whatnot. So that's sort of the main thing I got from the governor's report. As far as this fiscal year goes, it'll make for some interesting conversations as to whether there's supplemental spending needed in any areas, but certainly there are other funding or spending pressures identified in that plan as well.
And this is another way for both the governor's office and for lawmakers and other policymakers to take a closer look at, what needs to happen in this next 6 months. I think there are a lot of people out there who hear surplus or adjusting revenues up and think, well, maybe we should, lower taxes, or maybe we should return some of this money to taxpayers. But we've not heard that from lawmakers really, or the governor yet, as they continue to look forward even beyond this fiscal year, right?
Right. So, couple things on that point is, it's the monthly performance thus far has been good, but anything can happen, like you alluded to in the opening here, in the next 6 months of the fiscal year, 7 months, because especially during April, like state fiscal years are made or broken in April every year, because that's when you're getting the main tax filings in. If the stock market, if there's a lot of capital gains in a year, you're getting more in tax revenue. But if there's more losses, you're paying out more to some people, certainly. Basically, what we're looking at is we're through the year so far, Illinois is in good shape, so much to a point where it's going to look like right now, Gombe thinks, end the year with about $422 million surplus. But
well, I think you and I are both getting to the same thing. There are also some cautionary tales within that report, and things that lawmakers and the governor are going to have to take a very close look at that may come up even in this fiscal year, in terms of, hey, we need extra money for this program, or we've got a pressure here. I know that the asylum seekers issue is always something that it seems there's always more need than money available.
Yeah, so the governor's office of management and budget identified those as spending pressures, and there's about $1 billion more in so-called spending pressures than what they anticipated when approving the budget, and they are related to the asylum seekers, costs associated with that, outstanding bills at the Department of Innovation and Technology, some increased group health insurance costs, caseload pressures at the Department on Aging and the Department of Human Services and stuff like that. So that takes a bite out of the added $1.4 billion, to the tune of about, now they're anticipating about a $400 million surplus.
As we have these conversations about the budget, you see people outside the dome saying, okay, well, so does this mean good news or bad news? Are we talking about a healthy state budget picture, or are we in similar situations as we have been over the last 15 or 20 years where we're kind of living paycheck to paycheck as a state? How would you classify this?
It's certainly not, it's not majorly bad, not majorly good news on either side of the pendulum.
That was Capital News Illinois Editor-in-Chief Jerry Nowicki speaking with Jennifer Fuller about the latest reports on the state's finances. Governor J.B. Pritzker is scheduled to give his budget address to lawmakers on February 21st. And that's Sound Ideas today. WGLT's news magazine is made possible in part by Bloomington-Normal Audiology. I'm John Norton. Story help from WGLT's Charlie Schlenker and Lauren Warnicki. Ryan Toohey edits Sound Ideas. This is 89.1 WGLT and WGLT.org, part of the NPR network.